So anyway, this is a little bit about myself. Back in 1994, the first edition of the 6-meter book that I wrote, World Radio, came out. It ended at 4 edition at 2008, and I haven't made any new one because World Radio wasn't around anymore. I also co-wrote a book with Gordon West, and that came out in 2003. You might still see copies of it. It has the Aurora background. It talks about the different propagation modes on the 6 meters and on the VHF bands. And I do a regular speaking gig at Ham Radio University in January in Long Island every year. I've been doing it for more than a dozen years so far. So I think that's how I ended up here. Somebody must have saw me and recommended me, and I appreciate that very much. So that's a little bit about myself. Get into things. So we had choice of 2 dates, the summer or today, and I figured today would be good because some of you might have gotten on 6 meters and made some observations. I got some detailed notes from George N2DC about the stuff he worked on FT8 on 6-meter mode there, and there's very good stuff here. I was wondering if any of you might have been on the band this summer or heard it on field day. Show of hands, some people, or a few. Okay, I didn't expect a lot, but I understand. Likewise too, there's a June contest and a September contest that the league sponsors. So just wanted to get an idea. There was a phrase that a lot of hams early on that got on 6 meters, they used to call it the magic band. So why is it called the magic band? Well, most of the time the band is dead. Okay, like 90% of the time it's dead. But at some times during the course of the year or a day, you can hear certain propagation modes where the band just comes alive for 10 minutes, an hour, several hours. You name it. It's very interesting. And it's because it's such a quiet band that when you hear these propagation modes, you start to understand the way these propagation modes work. That's why the map is a big thing. And these are the major propagation modes you would hear on 6 meters. Sporadic-E, Aurora propagation, F2, transequatorial propagation, and some combination modes, which is transequatorial plus Sporadic-E. So we'll get into details on these. Believe it or not, you can work F2 activity on 6 meters, but you need good sunspot count. So you need the solar flux over 200, and you need the sunspots to be over 200. The last real big rush for that was around 2001, 2002. Unfortunately, we've been kind of in a decline in the cycles with peaks. And it's supposedly 25 is not going to be very good. It might even be worse than the current cycle that we just went through. So F2 activity may not be very big on 6 meters in this upcoming cycle, although there will be some versions of it. So you're not going to see too many east-west paths. However, there will be some F-layer type of activity known as transequatorial propagation, and I will explain that as we get into the slides. The main mode for propagation will be Sporadic-E, and that is very, very intense during the summer months, from May up to early August, and there's some minor season in November through January timeframe. But Sporadic-E will be the main mode for which people can work GX on 6 meters. We'll go into details why. As I said, F2 is going to be diminished or unlikely. However, Sporadic-E is going to be the main mode. It's a skywave propagation mode. And as I said, it occurs from May through August is the main time. And it can make the band very, very interesting. And the thing about 6 meters is it truly is a borderline band between 28 megahertz, which is the top of the VHF range, and then when you go up to VHF and then UHF. So things get very interesting as you reach that region of 6 meters there. Some interesting facts about the Sporadic-E propagation mode. It was actually discovered by radio hams back in 1935 on the 5-meter band. Now, the 5-meter band, I think, was 56 megahertz, 54, 56 megahertz. And we had that band until World War II. After the war ended, they shifted us to 50 megahertz, to 6 meters, the government did. Now, with Sporadic-E, as you can see in the map, I made a little Sporadic-E cloud here. It's around 70 miles above the Earth when it forms. And it's very, very effective at reflecting radio waves. You will hear it on 10 meters too. Like in the summertime, you might start hearing short skip into Tennessee or Florida out of nowhere. Because 10 meters is generally very quiet in the summertime, except for these types of Sporadic-E activity. And these formations can last as little as 5 minutes to much as several hours. There may be a lot of fading because it's non-uniform. And signals can get very, very loud at times, and then and you can work stuff with low power. As I mentioned, May to June, major season, and then there's a minor season, November to January. Now, this may look like a dirty sponge, but if you can imagine this to be a Sporadic-E cloud, this is essentially what a Sporadic-E cloud would look like if you can see it. You can't though. And so it's a very porous type of thing of metallic ions, and it's just going around, flattened out. And as these things get more exciting, they tend to be more dense. And as they get denser and denser, they reflect higher frequency radio waves. So you can actually work 2 meters Sporadic-E. It does happen maybe once a year. I worked it twice in my life, and I worked as far west as Oklahoma or Missouri on 2 meters Sporadic-E, using about 40 watts and a 3-element beam from my car. It's just amazing. One time I did it with a vertical, so it's a very interesting phenomenon, and it's a very efficient phenomenon. And during the 1950s and 60s, there was a lot of interest by the scientific community regarding Sporadic-E, because in those days we had antennas for our TV sets. And during the summer, you would never get to watch your program because there'd be some cross-channel interference coming on the state, like Tennessee or Florida. You would just see cross-channel interference in channel 2 and 4 a lot of times. So there was a lot of interest, to say what's going on here. And they sent various rocket probes into active Sporadic-E formations of different parts of the world, like Wallops Island, a few other places, and they found that the ions that make up Sporadic-E formations are actually metallic in nature. And iron, magnesium, nickel, silicon, and other metals. And these all probably came from meteor ablation. We get bombarded with a lot of meteor on a daily basis into the ionosphere. So all these are particles that came in by meteors and recombined with oxygen ions, and they're there. And through things like wind shear, they actually develop into very flat formations, like a municipal mirror. And during the summer, because it's warmer here, right, we get a lot of solar oxygen ions. So these combine with metallic ions to give you the Sporadic-E formation. That's a very simplistic way of describing it, but it's basically what happens. Now, what's interesting during the summer, particularly June and July, you may not just have one formation, you may have multiple formations throughout a large geographic area like the United States. And then you can work long-range DX on occasion during those months when the activity is very high. As I mentioned, like the sponge, as it gets denser and thicker, it can reflect higher frequency. And the big thing to know is Sporadic-E is independent of the solar cycle. It's completely, for the most part, independent of the cycle that we see. It's a different phenomenon. phenomenon is in the E region as opposed to the F region. So here's a very crude, rough diagram about what a single hop sporadic-E formation would look like. And basically, 100 kilometers or 70 miles to the top, and roughly 700 to 1,200 miles being covered by one single sporadic-E formation. I have worked all these modes on sporadic-E. I actually had AM radio. I worked at a station in Tennessee with AM once. But CW sideband and now FT8 digital modes are very common modes that we'll be using sporadic-E formation. I moved this from a previous formation, so I put it over New Jersey as the center. And that's pretty much the range of stations you can work in one single hop during the summer. So from Jersey, you can work into Florida, into the Midwest, to Missouri, Indiana, Ohio, as far up as Canada, depending where the formations are. So, as I said, the ARL gives a VUCC award when you work 100 different grid squares. Grid squares are longitude and latitude of 2 by 1. So we are in FM 20, I believe, right now. Correctly. Very easy with a fair amount of activity to work 100 grids, get them confirmed, and you can get a VUCC award. As I said, it's 2 by 1. We're located at FM 20. Pretty much from here you can work. This is the EM field, Echo Mike. Pretty much most of the south. It's very easy to work for the most part with a relatively simple station of 100 watts, maybe a 2 or 3 element beam, sometimes even vertical. You can do it. It's not too difficult. Now, what makes it very interesting, in June and July, you have multiple formations. So this is a very crude representation how I could work from Long Island into the West Coast, because I have 2 formations lining up. It works out pretty good there. And I have had days, I'm trying to remember, it was about 8 or 9 years ago. We had a full day opening in the last part of June in Europe. Shortly after 2 o'clock, I started working some stations in Portugal, and then the band just stayed open. I was working in Ireland, France, Germany. It was just a very unusual opening. And it was just very strong. It was very stable for the most part. So it can happen where you have a very good day. And this is what, say, 2 hops would look like. You start hitting into California, Nevada, Utah, and down into the Caribbean, like Cuba and Puerto Rico. So what I have found with FT8 coming in is kind of taking over a lot of activity from sideband to CW. It is a very interesting mode to create a lot of curiosity. It was developed by a Jersey ham, Joe Taylor, K1JT. And he used it really kind of as a scientific tool, because the digital mode really hears signals that you can't hear with the human ear. And they originally started with JT65, and now up to FT8, and there's some meteor scatter mode too, which is being used too. It seems to be about 80% of the day-to-day activity is going on FT8 lately. So a lot of stations that are being worked are those you can't hear. The tones are what the computer can hear. So it's essentially a computer hearing another computer signal. It follows a certain sequence of time, I think 15 seconds interval. I don't use it, so I'm trying to just quote what I know from other people. And so the computer gets to the FCC award. So, but that's a little joke. So anyway, it was reduced a bit. However, there's still a lot of beacons on the band, from 50.060 to 50.080. A lot of CW beacons, 5 to 10 watts, different places. We have two in this area. We have K2ZD, which is North New Jersey, 50.060. So a lot of times when the band is dead, we can use the beacons to check out the receiver and make sure you're still hearing stuff. I have one about 10 miles from my house, N2GHR, which is an FM30. So they're those are good for locals, and then when you start hearing stuff from Florida, you hear the Echo Lima or Echo Mike Richware field. And I have asked a lot of people about FT8 and single sideband CW during the VHF contest. And it still seems like the June contest, where you have a lot of sporadic activity, there's still a lot of sideband and CW activity, mainly sideband. And the reason is, when the band is open, the sideband station can go very, very quickly. So you can actually make 3 or 4 contacts in a minute if you really got good power and good operating technique. So it still seems like for the contest, it's a mixed bag. And there's a lot of FT8 activity during the contest when things slow down. So it takes a little longer to make a digital contact, but the improvements are continuing to be made. I won't be surprised if someday it will be just as quick as a CW contact or a sideband contact. And I mentioned multiple hops for IT. June and July is statistically the best month. You can't say for sure what day you're going to hear the opening, but usually 60 to 70% of the days in June and July, you're going to hear some opening during the course of the day. It could be an hour or 2 hours, unless you can work into Europe from here during those months. Things can be pretty good there. Some summers where they're good, you can see 5 or 6 transatlantic openings from the East Coast into Europe. And as I said, it's unaffected by the solar cycle, so it's usually consistent each summer, although some summers are better than others. Simple stations, simple beams, 100 watts, can be very fine. I plotted some things. Some stations I worked from parking lot to my job, and I didn't have anything more than a vertical and about 50 watts. And I worked a station in Slovenia and one in France on CW. So that was around noontime, maybe a little bit earlier, maybe about 11 o'clock in the morning. And you know, some people take cigarette breaks at work. I take breaks. That way. So it's about 2 to 3 hops to get there. I would say probably 3. So the Azores, CQ VHF is around here somewhere. Usually has 2 hops. And he's usually a station we work quite a bit on 6 meters during the summer. So here's Joe. This is an interesting note. Aurora. There were a few events in the last few years, but Aurora is based on geomagnetic events that result from solar flares and CME impact. Even though sunspot activity can be low, you can still get a major aurora opening because you have those random CMEs or solar flares that come around. And it's a very strange mode, and I'm going to give you a report in just a second. The interesting thing about aurora is instead of a conventional skip path, it's actually backscatter. And so if I am worried that there's an aurora opening happening, people are working aurora stations, I'm basically going to point my beam north. So I'm going to say out here, I'm going to point my beam north and reflect off the aurora back to another station. And typically, it's how it's done. Aurora is also in the same zone as Sporadic-E, in the same height range, about 70 miles up. It's in the layer. And I've worked some intense openings. I have here a recording I made. This is from about 2001. And I didn't have a very sophisticated station. I just had 10 watts, and I had a dipole, which was up maybe 20 feet at best. And there was a very, very good opening. I think it was April 2001. And you hear, really just, all right. That's my station calling this guy. He's in Canada, in Ontario. That distorted signal is the effective aurora on the signal. It shifts it to like a phase shift. You're actually doing that now, or is that through He's doing that? VD3KZ. And I was using 10 watts in the dipole. So it can be done, although it's probably recommended that you use 100 watts, but I don't have any time.
You just sit there wait for the band to alternate? You just sit there wait for the band to alternate?
No. No, because a lot of times there'll be a lot of words that some geometric events can happen, like this case, in the aurora. Now with Sporadic-E, in the old days, yes, you'd be waiting, listening, like say early morning, mid-morning and early evening. However, now the spotting networks. So 1 on 6 meters is ON or KST. Also, if you go to EHAM, they have a lot of spots on different frequencies. So there's a lot of spotting networks on the internet. Okay, but in the old days, yes, you did listen, you picked your targets, okay? But certainly the spotting sites have made it a lot easier. Now, in the old days, before the internet, you would read about potential major geomagnetic events coming from Boulder data, NOAA data from Boulder. And that opening that you just heard there was the KP reached, I think, 7 or 8. It was a very strong. The KP index goes up to 9. So 7 or 8 is pretty high up there. And that was a pretty good opening. And you can hear the distortion on it. Voice on aurora is not recommended. Everybody sounds like they're drinking water when they talk. And it's very distorted, it's very garbled. I've actually worked 2-meter aurora. I worked into the Midwest on 2-meter aurora, I think even Canada once. And the signals are so wide, it has to be seen up. You can't even use voice. It's just so wide and distorted. And what happens is the aurora is a very complex phenomenon. And signals just get bounced around a lot, so there's a lot of phase shifting going on. This is a little off the subject, but I got my job 2 jobs ago. I got it because I knew about the aurora. Okay. You say, well, how's that possible? How could knowing about the aurora get you a job in the technical field? And it's in the engineering department in Citibank. And it was a grueling process. And it turned out that the last guy I had to interview was the guy running the place. And he had spent 2 years in the service up in Fort Churchill, Manitoba, way up in Aurora country. And he was supporting a team of scientists from the U.S. and Australia while doing aurora research. They were flying rockets into the aurora and collecting data. So I had written an article on aurora propagation and I put it in the back of my resume. So that's all we talked about for an hour and I got the job. So knowing things that are unusual pay off. Maybe not always, but once in a while it comes out. Yes, sir.
How far south can you work aurora? You can't see it down in Florida or Georgia.
There's been reports of as far south as even Georgia. But typically, from what I've seen in maybe like New Jersey, Maryland, typically the lowest it goes. The guys who do very well all the time is Vermont, Maine, Michigan, because they're right on the edge of the aurora zone. You got to think of the aurora as like a very large blanket. So when the aurora gets excited, this aurora zone starts to extend. You know, it just gets bigger and bigger. And it's basically extending from the geomagnetic North Pole. So this gets lower and lower in latitude. So sometimes on rare occasions you hear on 10 and 15 meters, but it's not. It's much more observable on 6 and occasionally on 2. I don't know why it's not picked up on 10. Sometimes, like in the 10-meter contest, like late at night, you're working in Siberia, and that's kind of a form of aurora. It's Aurora-E, they call it. And when the aurora gets so excited, it actually becomes full fidelity. So it almost sounds like FM radio in some ways. So it's a version of that. Yes, sir.
I have worked quite a bit of aurora on 10 as well as 6.
Okay.
And it seems that, to me, the higher in frequency the aurora occurs, the more distorted the signal. Do you
Yes.
agree with that?
I would agree with that. You got to remember, too, it's a very kind of unstable, not unstable, but it's just a lot of stuff going on. It's just raining all over the place, you know. And it's a weird, it's a visual and it's a radio phenomenon. So that's the interesting part of it. I mean, you can see it, you know you're going to work some radio over it if there's stations around. And this general manager gave me the job after I told him what I knew about the aurora. He's told me that they'd be up there in the quiet part of northern Canada, and you could actually hear the aurora as a high-pitched shrill through the snow. They could actually hear it. It was like a, so I think there's some mechanical resonance there, you know, because there's, you know, just so much going on at once. So this is a very multifaceted phenomenon when I look at it, you know, visually, radio-wise, and even mechanically that you can hear it. And I once had correspondence with Ham and VH up in Northwest Territories, and they used to get Japanese tourists in July that would just go for the express purpose of seeing the aurora. So, not anymore, but they did, you know, 15 years ago. So,
You have to
the
be
thing
able
is,
to,
you hear it on 6 meters, so, yes, sir.
you have to be able to see the aurora in order to work it with the
No.
radio.
Now, I have so much light pollution in Long Island, this is some here. I'll never see the aurora in my lifetime from Long Island, okay? But I've had people tell me during the contest, when they had aurora activity in September, sometimes it happens in September, they could actually see it from the mountain. You see the little green, pale green, sometimes pink, but mostly green. Aurora is very, when it happens, it typically happens around the equinox, which would be September, October, March, April, May, that time frame. Because of the way the Earth is positioned to receiving the activity from the sun. It's in that, you know, the Earth rotates around the sun like this. It stays on its axis. So during the equinox, it's facing a certain way, like this. So it gets these these solar particles coming through the poles of the Earth. So it creates a lot of activity in the North and South Pole to the point that they extend, as I mentioned, you know, the formation. Someday I should just give a talk strictly on the aurora, so I just wanted to give you a little taste of it. So this mode you'll probably still hear on 6 meters, even if the sunspot cycle goes down the numbers, because you still get these events from the solar sphere. You're going to see some major eruption, even though the sunspot count will be low, you still can get these isolated events. And again, the websites that I mentioned, EHAM and ON4KST, if the aurora happens, you're going to see it spotted on those. Right now, I don't think the FT8 mode can handle the aurora because it's just too much shifting. I don't think digital will work, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone figures it out someday. But they probably has to be a much smaller sample because the aurora is so diverse and changing. So that is a E layer phenomenon. This is a F layer phenomenon. As I mentioned, conventional F2 propagation at 6 meters is going to be diminished due to low solar activity this upcoming cycle. So there may not be a lot of east-west. However, the magnetic equator is a very highly energized area. It doesn't take much activity to get it to a point that can actually reflect radio waves. And just like aurora is prevalent during the equinox period, again because of the positioning of the Earth to the Sun, the lesser amount of ionization, generally a late afternoon, early evening occurrence. I don't have a reason for that, but that just seems to be the case. And I expect we'll see some of this, probably going to be around 2020, 2021, that time frame. Now this is what it would look like here in a graphic description. Basically, it almost acts like a tropical dot. So it's like there's a channel. It's up about 200 kilometers, 150 miles up. So a station, say in Argentina, which was transmit point north basically, and this signal will be dumped in this channel, and it will come out an exit point, and it will go to an area like in Florida. Typically, Florida or Argentina is a very typical path for transequatorial propagation. And there's some different variations of that. So you asked me, how is it possible that I could work in Argentina by this mode? Well, it can combine with Sporadic-E form propagation. This is a plot of a contact I made in 2002 in the afternoon. This I did for my car. I had just a vertical. I didn't even have a directional antenna. I just had a vertical, background vertical, about 50 watts. And so I had this short skip to Florida. I actually heard a couple of Florida stations, and then I worked a station in Argentina. So this is the beauty about 6 meters. Because it's only activity occasionally, not as much as like say 40 meters, 20 meters. When you hear something like this, you know exactly how it has to work. There's no other way it can work. This is how it works, by the combination mode. And I don't think a lot of this was understood for many years until more and more hams start working stations, and they say, oh yeah, I hear the stations in Florida, and then I'm hearing the station in Argentina. So mathematically, this is the only way it can work. And in a way, it's not just the magic bands, the geometric bands, it's actually a math band. Because people used to say, well, how do you know what propagation mode you're working on 6 meters? Well, because this is the only thing that makes sense. When you just put these things together, it's like a puzzle. It's the only way. And the event could last about an hour. I think I have one here. Oh, this is a cool one. This is really interesting. These were 2 countries I needed to work on 6 meters. And this is a really interesting event. This happened late in the afternoon. The plot was similar to this. So you have those stations in South America here going over. And just by the plot, I could kind of figure out the formation of the Sporadic-E, kind of how it worked. So I think 2 of these stations are working in code, one on sideband. The station that I worked on sideband, I think was this station. This was May of 14. I gave a talk in the ARL convention 2 months later, and I showed this thing. This guy was at the talk. He came up from Chile to Connecticut, and he introduced himself to me at the end of the talk. So I thought that was really cool. And he was only a sideband only operator, so my strength is mostly in code, but we did it. So That was not a very good year for F2 or 6, but it still was enough activity in the F layer or the magnetic equator to make this happen. So I do believe we're going to see that type of activity in the next cycle around 2020, 2021. These are some of the setups I use. These are not elaborate setups. This beam is over 20 years old. You can see it fell down at least 30 times. I always try to get the extra 5 feet. I always pay for it because I'm on a hill. The wind can change all of a sudden. So I busted those, got them up. So it's amazing. It's still in one piece for the most part.
They flap around a lot.
So this is set up I used in Field Day when I used to be involved with the Peconic Amateur Radio Club, which is in the North Fork of Long Island. And one year, it was 1998, we had tremendous Sporadic-E opening. As you know, Field Day is the third weekend in June. So the band was pretty much open, except for a few hours at night, for the entire contest. So I made about 270 contacts in the 24 hours, which beat the 8-meter station. Sorry. But it can be done. This setup here, I was talking at dinner, and there's only 2 hills on Long Island. 250 feet and 260 feet. That's it. Yeah, I mean, you have mountains you can get to here, what, 20 minutes or 30 minutes? I don't have any mountains on Long Island. Even though they show the mountains in Pearl Harbor, don't believe it. It never happened. There's no mountains on Long Island. So this hill is about 10 minutes from my house. It's 250 feet. It doesn't really make a difference for skip contacts, but for tropo and line of sight contacts on 6 and 2 meters. So that's why I use the hill, just to get above the noise and get good line of sight contacts.
The one at Port Jefferson, where you're located?
I'm sorry?
The one at Port Jefferson, Hill, or?
This hill is in Farmingdale. It's in the center part of Suffolk County. It's halfway between Fort Jeff and Patchogue. And the other hill is in the north part of Suffolk County in Huntington, West Hills. And yeah, I look at all my friends in Connecticut, 1,000-foot mountains. I said, wow, I'd love to have one of those. But it isn't what it is. So anyway, very easy to set up. And I have a very fairly heavy umbrella stand that holds this, but it's not always stable in 20-mile-an-hour winds. So it's built in concrete, but someday I'm going to get too old, I can't carry it anymore, so I won't be able to report it. There are 3 contests that are pretty big. If you're around those weekends, you should listen. They usually start at 2 o'clock on Saturdays. The January contest and the June contest and September. Those first 2 contests are usually the 3rd weekend of the month. And September is the 2nd weekend of the month. And the CQ VHF Worldwide contest is the 2nd or 3rd weekend of July. These 2 would be very good for Sporadic-E activity. Sometimes you get some Sporadic-E in January. Very rare in September, but I've had a few occasions where I've had Sporadic-E open, mostly trouble. Trouble was the big mode. So for a while, I thought VHF was doing pretty good. I think it's kind of leveled off a little bit. Why? I don't know, but I find I can only be competitive by going portable, so that's why I do the hill topping. I have some very powerful stations near where I am to run, gobs and gobs of power on all the VHF bands, so I'm not going to be competitive in that. So the portable field seems to be very good for me, and find a lot of surprises and stuff. Tips towards working the X on 6 meters. The domestic call frequency is 50.125. It was very popular up to about 2 years ago. Still, the rule of thumb. The X call frequency for CW and sideband is 110. I mentioned the beacon portion between 60 and 80. Digital modes, I think it's primarily on this now, FT8. This used to be the frequency for J-T65. But 50.313, there's some shifts where a lot of the digital station produces. CW is still an important mode. There's still some Europeans that like it. It may become more popular. Again, I mentioned the ON4 KST site, very helpful. There's usually a map and there's chats, people comparing notes and so on. As I said, digital has dominated. There's even been some spots in somewhere would say human station. So, little inside joke somewhere. As I mentioned, Sporadic-E will still be very constant every summer, and you can pretty much work in that area. So, there's my sales pitch. Back in '94, I wrote this book, World Radio. They were really great people to work with. I have went to 4 editions. This is the last edition, came out in 2008. If anybody's interested, I have copies available for $10, $3 off the cover price. I have a few here. They're big. It's tech. A lot of people write to me and say it's available. It is, but I guess a lot of people think it's out of print. It just hasn't been publicized too much. I do miss World Radio because they were kind of like into, you know, what can you do with bands? You know, what can you do with the radio? More in the operating sense. You don't quite get that anymore, you know, with the 2 magazines that are left. So, anyway, I imagine there's some questions, so, yes, sir.
With the Sporadic-E files, are those metallic ions in the atmosphere, are they fairly persistent? They just coalesce under certain conditions, or do they follow
Certain conditions. And I've been really reading up on this for the last 25 years. I'm obsessed with it, you know, and that's the bad thing. But what I think, you know, first of all, you need metallic ions, and you need a recombination with the oxygen. That's it. And there's more of it in the summertime. They wouldn't be able to reflect radio waves if there wasn't another factor. And wind shear seems to be the other factor. 2 winds from different directions pressing on pancakes. And I believe wind shear is very active during summer and a little bit during the winter, not so much in the equinox. I was looking at my pool the last couple of years. I have a circular pool, and you know, every time you think you clean it, you know, there's still some dust there, crap that collects. It always collects in the middle. And I'm saying, gee, that's it. It's a vortex. So I imagine in the ionosphere there's some collection point. For whatever reason, maybe it slows down. But those collection points is when you get enough particles together that can actually reflect the radio wave.
and are the particles themselves persistent in the atmosphere? Do they follow meteor activity?
It doesn't follow meteor shower activity, believe it or not. It's the daily meteor input. Because there's been some studies where they looked at meteor showers to see if there was a correlation with increased Sporadic-E. And it's just a daily input. There's billions of tons that go in. And they need the right conditions, though. Oxygen ions and wind shear activity. And eventually, they can go either one of 2 ways. They either go back into just floating around in the reservoir, or they just drop out. But you can't see them, you know. But they're microscopic. But like in meteor scatter, for example, you're really reflecting off the meteor trail, which is burnt up ions as it burns through the E-ray. I didn't talk much about meteor. A lot of that's going digital too. So, you know, so it's a very interesting phenomenon. I was amazed at all the scientific studies. The Russians were actually the first ones who kind of like made a correlation with rocket studies back in 1960. So it's been around a bit. So another question. Chris, I'll get you first.
An observation and a question. It seems to me from my operations on both bands that the same propagation modes exist on 6 and 10.
That's correct.
With one exception, that F2 is far rarer on 6 meters.
That's correct.
I mean, F2 is rare on 10, but it's far rarer on 6.
And I'll give you, yes, and I'll give you one correlation. When you hear it shorten up on 10 meters, like really shorten up, like you're hearing, say, Western Pennsylvania. No, let me get it right now. You can, one band will actually shorten up more than the other. So like say 6 meters shortens up to a very close distance, like Western Pennsylvania, then you know you have to listen on 2. Because then you say, okay, because it works like a, I don't have a thing, but like you have critical frequency. So you have one like this, and then you have the other one that's longer range, which would be the higher frequency. And so on 10, if it shortens up on 10, like say to Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, then it's worth listening on 6.
The other thing is a question. What is the practical limit of troposcatter on 6 meters?
It really depends where you're located, okay? We have, where I live, we have occasional tropo paths to the Outer Banks of North Carolina on 2 meters at 432. There's one station I worked there, you know, every so many years. And that's because the path follows along the coast. And North Carolina goes out like this and it comes back. So that Outer Banks is right at the end of it there. So you can work 500 to 1,000 miles. Now, my friend Gordon West will tell you a longer path from California, Southern California to Hawaii. And it's very common every summer on 2 meters, sometimes 432. You can go on the beach with an HT and be able to hear the Hawaiian beacons. I mean, imagine that. It's a very tremendous, you know, pattern there.
I wonder if that's also, I'm wondering if that phenomenon is related to ducting as well. There's some ducting involved in that.
Yeah, well, what happens with tropo, you have like one air mass go over the other and it creates a duct. So that duct can carry 2 meters or 432.
Characteristic, okay.
So I think it's the, let me get it right, the hot air going over the coast. So. Yes, sir.
Just a comment regarding the E-skip on 6 meters.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, I was working a VHF contest in the mid-'80s and worked a whole string of states. This is from New Jersey, a whole string of stations from Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, northern Maine, and Canada. And all of a sudden, it was like Mother Nature threw a switch. And within 30 seconds, all those stations disappeared that were in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and it's really weird how things can switch up so quickly when Sporadic-E is on 6. Just a comment on 2 meters, since you mentioned the ducts. Also, for those interested, there is an area between Florida and Texas across the Gulf of Mexico that has similar propagation characteristics, as there is an area in southern Australia called the Great Australian Bight that has several conditions like the California to Hawaii duct, Gulf of Mexico duct.
I used to get this letter from a crazy New Zealand ham. He would send me this big, massive letter every month. I still got them. I don't know what to do with them. And he would tell me about these openings on 432 and 2 meters. And he would insist they were Sporadic-E. I said, no, they're tropo.
No, tropo.
It's tropo. But he was like, no, you couldn't reason with him, right? I said, no, they're tropo, because if it was Sporadic-E, it would be this, you know, the way I described it here. Because you do not get Sporadic-E propagation on 432. It's just so high, it's just beyond the practical limit.
The highest I've seen Sporadic-E is 220, but that's
correct.
very rare.
They are rare, and but they do happen. And like I said, you start hearing it shorten up on 6, shorten up on 2.
Yeah. I also worked Oklahoma on 2 on E-skip, using a vertical, by the way. So
I've
we're
done
in the
it
same
on
boat
both.
there.
But the tropo, there's other tropo paths, you know, you can go on some of these sites, but there's one in the middle of the country near the Great Lakes, you know. So it's all a matter of how fronts, you know, collide and overlap each other. So, any other questions? Yes,
I know one thing about CW. I was on one of the contests, and there was a big pilot in the sideband section working this station out in the Midwest. So I said, I'm not going to make it. I'm an A watts for dipole. So I went down to the CW band, there's a dipole at CQ, and I watched him using the same grid that all these guys are piled up about. So it's worth it. And one thing too, the CW, people, you know, CW, you won't ever hear them on sideband.
Well, I will tell you 2 things, sorry, Dan, to get back to questions. Since I operate portable, the limit is 10 watts, okay? You know, I accept it, but I'm never outmanned. the outdone, but I'm never out there. So I had, during a tremendous opening in '06 in the June contest, I was hearing double hop into Montana and the West. And there was a ham I knew, I think it was W7EJ, I think his call was, Lance. And he had this massive pile of sideband stations. So I know, there's no way I'm going to work with 10 watts of, the 3-element beam up to 10 feet. So I called him on CW, because I knew he was a great CW operator. And that was dirty, but I got him. He said, hey, who's that CW station? And he said, that's you, Ken. Thanks, made contact. But I broke a pile up, which there must have been at least 20 or 30 sideband stations for all. So you got to do something different. It's like you got to reinvent yourself. Another story. In '02 in January, it was the last F2 during a VHF contest that I heard. So the day before, there was some West Coast coming in. And next morning, there was a little bit of snow on the ground. There was a station from Iceland that came in, booming in. And the pile-up I heard on this guy, he wasn't really a very good polished contest operator. The pile-up I heard on was the biggest pile-up I ever heard in my life, more than an HF band. It was like everybody and his brother was trying to work this guy during the contest. It was amazing. So two little things. CW and sideband cross mode does work sometimes. You had a question.
Yeah, based on what you know on ECF, would it be true then that those hams that live in countries around the equator have ECF much more time of the year, like almost all time of the year?
There used to be a theory that all the Sporadic-E clouds came from the equator, but no, it's, I would say it's about the same. They may have, they have another mode,
FAI?
Transequatorial, no, I'm sorry, ESQ. They have an equator type of Sporadic-E. The problem is there's not a lot of stations to really get a lot of data on it. They have certain forms that we don't hear up here that were annotated in books back in the '60s. So another question, yes.
But the stations are reversed. Do they have? We have May to July for ESCAP. Do they have it then too, or do they have just?
Right now, Argentina is in the summer season, so they have all types of Sporadic-E activities. So they're basically working Argentinians and Chile and Uruguay, pretty much, and Brazil on occasion. So we're going to just smaller amounts of activity in the winter months. But yes, it does follow the reverse of north and south. Another question, yes.
I had an experience on sticks. Maybe you can explain this. I've never been able to find a really satisfying explanation for it. 1970 or so, winter, like January. Snowless but cold, very cold. Full moon, 6 meters. I'm transmitting on about 50.1 CW, going to about 25 words per minute. So there were several stations. Mario, CQ VHF, if you know him, he was active in those days, and the other guy, 3CS in Pennsylvania, was very active. So I was doing the same thing, just looking for, I think the antenna was going probably southwest, 3-element beam, about 150 watts, that was running, great DR6. I'm sending, I let up on I finished my call, and I hear an echo of my signal coming back to me. I thought somebody was fooling around. I did it a few times, hit the key, set random frequencies, and always got an echo. What do you think that was, an ionized cloud or what?
That could have been backscatter.
From what? A cloud?
Well, I don't profess to know everything about backscatter. I mentioned it in Aurora, but for years I used to be able to work Canada on the ARL contest when there was no obvious Sporadic-E path there. Then I realized it was because I was hearing stations in the south that my signal was reflecting in the backscatter means towards Canada. And I actually witnessed it once on 6 meters. Trying to remember. Yeah, 2 stations. Station in Florida, 1 in Maine. I'm pointing to the station in Florida, and I hear the station in Maine. How weird is that, right? Then I turn my beam to face the station in Maine, do not hear it. It was at that point I realized I was working backscatter off of the, towards the Florida direction, towards the station in Maine. I mean, that is really weird, and that happened in the January contest. It was just so weird. So, some means,
There's a connection between these two.
some things like that could be explained by backscatter or just some distorted pattern. Another thing I forgot to mention, the aurora can be so intense sometimes. I've actually worked at a station 10 miles away from me just by pointing the antenna north. And we were working by the edge of the aurora where I could still hear a little bit of this direct signal. But I was hearing the aurora tones too, so I was getting 2 for the price of 1 there. So it's really a lot of strange stuff happening. There's some questions in the back. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I mean, thinking to Fred's question, does electromagnetic radiation travel at the same speed through space as opposed to through a dielectric, like the E-layer?
No, probably not. But it may not be that much difference, you can tell.
So there's a possible mechanism for a delay, but not much.
Yeah. Well, like the aurora thing I just mentioned. Yeah. The ground wave and the aurora were 2 different speeds. You know, the ground wave was direct, was 10 miles away. But then the aurora was traveling, say, 40 or 50 miles up and coming back.
It's
So
like
that's
a path delay, yes.
2 different paths, 2 different times. And I wish I made a tape of that, but I made some other tapes, so that worked out pretty good. So, any other questions? I'll be here if anybody has any specific individual questions. So, I run my voice hoarse. It's been a bad issue over my voice. So, yes, sir.
I have the original report.
Sorry?
I have the original report from 1994.
Oh, you do?
It says what the future of the 6-meter band is. And I'm just thinking, how would you write that up there? What do you radios out for all of us? Somebody that has a 6-meter band.
Yeah. I was very, very lucky at the time did World Radio, and I changed each edition. As I learned more, I put more stuff in it. So this is almost a definitive edition. If I was to write another one, I would have more information on FTD. But that's not a field I'm very well versed in. So. Well, I want to thank you very much for having me. And it's a pleasure to meet you all.
Well, on behalf of the Fairlawn Amateur Radio Club, thank you very much for a very informative presentation. What's the place to see it? Cool. Oh, no problem. Thanks for coming out to see us. And,
Thank you so much.
okay.
Thank you.